Good evening, I'm David Kramer with Alaska Weather. As always, please visit our website, weather.gov/Alaska. You can get updates to the forecast or check out any watches, warnings, or advisories that we might have out for your area. You can also call our weather info line, 1-800-472-0391. Getting updates to the forecast through that means as well. Starting off, we have several warnings out for the state. We'll start in the Aleutian Islands, where we do have a high wind warning that is in effect right now and going to be out until 4 a.m. on Friday. This is for strong winds that could have gusts up to as high as 95 miles per hour for the eastern Aleutian Islands, and that does include Unalaska. Again, that is a high wind warning out currently until 4 a.m. on Friday. Down in the Panhandle area, starting off in the central locations, we do have another high wind warning out that does not start until 7 a.m. on Friday and will go out until 1 p.m. on Friday. Mid-morning, we're expecting the strongest winds, and even though this is primarily for the central inner channels, this does include Sitka as well. Could see winds up to as high as 60 miles an hour. Down in the southern inner channels of the Panhandle, we also have a high wind warning out. This is also for winds up to as high as 60 miles per hour for those southern inner channels, starting midnight tonight and going to go into noon on Friday. Again, this is high wind warning, where we could see winds 60 miles per hour for the southern inner channels going until noon on Friday. Up north near the St. Lawrence Island area, we will have some stronger northerly flow over the area on Friday and Saturday. This is going to lead to some elevated surf. We could see a run up of 2 feet above the normal high tide line on the northern side of St. Lawrence Island, so that does include Gamble and Savunga. Taking a look at our satellite imagery now, we'll start to look at some of the lows causing all of these high winds for our area. Starting off in the Bering Sea, you can see that low wrapping around near the Pribilof Islands on this satellite imagery, with the front moving across the Alaska Peninsula. To the west of that low, we can see some of the colder air coming in behind towards the central and western Aleutian Islands. As we watch this again, we'll focus towards the Panhandle area, where we have that stronger low coming up from the south, starting to bring cloud cover out throughout the Panhandle, but that low center still south of the area by quite a ways. Then finally, over mainland Alaska, some lingering cloud cover that is resulting in some lighter precip out over some portions of the mainland. As we look now for the remainder of today, we'll start again with a low out over the Bering Sea, down as low as 944 millibars. You can see the tight pressure gradient around that low, helping to bring in those stronger winds to the eastern Aleutian Islands. Colder behind this low, we are expecting to see some snow showers out by the western Aleutians, extending out through much of the northern Bering Sea as well. By the low itself, a little bit warmer, expecting to see primarily rain, then a mixture of rain and snow for the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island. Primarily the higher elevations are where we're going to see the snow, primarily rain near the water. This is going to be true along the North Gulf Coast as well, where we will see primarily rain at low-lying areas and then starting to get some snow up in the mountains. Up through the rest of mainland Alaska, we'll see some snow in the northern portions of the interior, moving up to the Arctic coastline as well. Then down in the Panhandle, we can see that 957 millibar low approaching the Panhandle, going to bring some stronger winds to the area, but for now, just bringing quite a bit of precip with some rain to southern and central locations, and then starting to see a mix towards snow as we get up towards the Lynn Canal area. Looking into tonight, that low will have moved to the just south of the Panhandle area into the eastern portions of the Gulf of Alaska, bringing those stronger winds throughout the southern and central inner channels. Still going to be primarily rain throughout the Panhandle area, extending that rain throughout much of the Gulf and the North Gulf coastline. But once again, we will see some snow starting to mix in at some of those higher elevations and some locations as we get farther inland for south central Alaska. We're going to see some snow extending up into the eastern portions of the interior, as well as through the Brooks Range and out by the Ukqiagvik area up in the Arctic coast. As we move down the west coast, we'll start to see precip pick back up as we get to the southwest coastline, where we'll still start to see some snow coming in around our strong low out over the Alaska Peninsula area, and still seeing that tight pressure gradient out over the eastern Aleutians, bringing those strong winds to the area. primarily rain around the low pressure center itself, but becoming more snow as we start to wrap in some of that colder air from the north as we get west of the Pribilof Islands and then out by the western Bering Sea as well as the western Aleutians. Moving into Friday, still going to see that northerly flow out over much of the Bering Sea. Primarily going to be snow in western and central locations, as well as locations farther to the north, getting up as high or as far north as the St. Lawrence Island area. Our low itself that was bringing those strong winds is going to push past the Alaska Peninsula towards Kodiak Island, but still going to be some stronger winds even lingering in to the afternoon hours on Friday, just not at that warning level anymore. Then we'll have widespread rain throughout the Gulf of Alaska, including the North Gulf Coast and down into the Panhandle. Winds diminish there as well as we have some weaker lows now moving throughout the Gulf of Alaska area. Higher elevations, going to once again see some snow as we get to more interior locations, especially around South Central. And then we're going to see snow throughout much of the interior, Brooks Range, and North Slope areas. As we move into Saturday, still going to see quite a bit of areas of snowfall. However, it will be relatively light for areas as we get into the interior and along some of the west coast. So see some snow along the North Slope as well, and then down all the west coast into the southwestern portions of the state. We're going to start to see some tongues of warmer air now out west, where we'll start to see a mix of rain and snow for the western Aleutian Islands, as well as the eastern Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula area. However, still colder up farther to the north, Pribilofs through the St. Lawrence Island area, expected to be primarily snow. Finally, we just have our one low lingering in the southern portions of the Gulf, bringing more rain to the Gulf of Alaska, all along the North Gulf Coast and Panhandle area. Still going to see that transition to snow in some of the higher elevations and interior locations as we get closer towards Haines and Skagway for the Panhandle, towards the Yakutat area, and much of south central Alaska, including the mountains in the Kenai Peninsula area. Taking us into our temperatures on Friday morning, looking at those low temperatures for the Panhandle, dropping down to the mid-40s for most locations. A little bit colder up in the Lynn Canal area, where Haines is expected to drop down to 38 degrees, where we could start to see some of that transition to be a mix of rain and snow. As we look over the south central locations, temperatures dropping down to the mid-30s near the water and the lower 30s as we get interior locations. And the Copper River Basin, going to be a little bit colder there, down to 22 degrees Friday morning for the Gulkana area. Friday afternoon highs starting off in the Panhandle just above 50 degrees for southern locations, and the upper 40s as we get farther to the north, Yakutat at 48 degrees. South central Alaska temperatures getting up into the 40s as well, mid-40s near the Gulf waters, including 45 for Kodiak Island and Kodiak City, and then the lower 40s as we get to more interior locations such as Anchorage and Talkeetna, and then 34 degrees for that high in the Gulkana area. Saturday morning lows starting off in the Panhandle, near or low 40s for all of the Panhandle area, and then it's going to continue along the North Gulf Coast until we get by the Kenai Peninsula area, where we will drop down into the mid to upper 30s. Warmer by the water, colder as we get a little bit farther to the north, dropping down to 30 degrees for Talkeetna and 22 again for the Gulkana area. 41 expected low for Kodiak. For our highs on Saturday afternoon, getting up into the upper 40s for most locations. Far southern places, we are going to see up to as high as 52 degrees. And then we will see around south central Alaska into the mid 40s. And then colder again in the Copper River Basin, 35 degrees for the Gulkana area. Moving up into the interior, we are going to see temperatures in the 20s for the most part for the interior. However, a few locations are going to stay into the teens, such as in the Yukon Flats, as well as through the Alaska Range. And then as we move up into the Brooks Range, also going to be in the teens there through Anaktuvuk Pass, 13 degrees. And along the Arctic coastline, we're going to drop down into the teens. For most locations, Utqiagvik will stay a little bit warmer at 22 degrees there. And then down the west coast, we are going to see temperatures dropping down into the mid-20s. For the Kotzebue Sound area, the upper 20s to near 30 for the Norton Sound area, with 31 degrees for Savunga. As we go into Friday afternoon high temperatures in the interior, we're going to get up into the lower to mid 30s, a little bit warmer as we get farther to the south, colder as we get closer to the north. We are going to see Arctic Village down to or up to 31 degrees. And then through the past 22 degrees, and then up along the Arctic coast, getting up into the 20s most locations. Utqiagvik continues to be one of the warmer ones at 28 degrees. Down the west coast, near 30 to the lower 30s for the Kotzebue Sound area, with Kotzebue itself getting up to 30 degrees. And then down in the Norton Sound area, getting up into the mid-30s. Taking us into Saturday morning lows for the interior, we're going to get down into the 20s in most locations. Still in the teens through the AKwx Pass, but otherwise a little bit warmer. And then along the Arctic coastline, we're going to get up into or down into the teens for many locations until we get up by AKwx. Still warmer there, 24 degrees for that low. Mid to upper 20s for the Kotzebue Sound area, and mid 20s to near 30 for the Norton Sound area. Finally, for our Saturday afternoon highs in the interior, we are getting up into the lower to mid 30s, and then up along the Arctic coastline, mid to upper 20s. Then we will get up into the lower 30s around Kotzebue Sound area. Kotzebue will be a little bit colder there, only getting up to 29 degrees, as well as at Ambler. And then down in the Northern Sound area, getting up into the mid 30s. Down in southwest Alaska, as well as the Aleutians. For southwest, we're going to drop down into the lower 30s. Near 40 degrees for the Alaska Peninsula, and mid 30s for much of the Aleutian Islands, with 35 at St. Paul. Friday afternoon highs getting up into the upper 30s for the YK Delta area, lower 40s for the Bristol Bay area, mid 40s for the Alaska Peninsula, and then near 40 to mid 40s for the Aleutian Islands. Down into the 20s for southwest, getting up to near 30, and then mid 30s for the Aleutians, and then finally up to near 40 for southwest Alaska and 40s for the Aleutians.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
For aviation, we'll start off with a look at our flying weather on Friday morning. With our strong system out in the Bering Sea, we do expect some areas of IFR for the central and eastern Bering, as well as the Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula, then MVFR conditions farther to the west. Up along the Arctic coastline, primarily MVFR conditions with some isolated areas of IFR near the AKwx area. And then down in the Gulf of Alaska, MVFR and IFR conditions are expected, with some of those conditions extending into south central Alaska, as well as throughout the Panhandle. Then on Friday afternoon, IFR conditions are going to be widespread throughout the Panhandle, as well as in northern portions of the Gulf, and then along the North Gulf Coast as well, and then improving to VFR conditions for much of the northern locations of south central Alaska. Eastern portions of the interior will gradually diminish and get down to IFR conditions far eastern locations. Up along the Arctic coast, MVFR conditions near the Brooks Range, getting to be more IFR conditions along the Arctic coastline. And then down in the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands in central and eastern locations, more IFR conditions expected, and then clearing up for the central and western Aleutians to VFR conditions. Saturday morning, we're going to have more VFR conditions for the central and western Aleutian Islands, but then dropping down again as we get closer to the eastern Aleutians, as well as Pribilof Islands and Alaska Peninsula, primarily IFR conditions in those locations. Some MVFR conditions will extend into southwest Alaska, so as much of south central, and then more IFR conditions for Prince William Sound through much of the Gulf and in southern locations of the Panhandle, with MVFR conditions farther to the north. Up in the interior, we're going to see some IFR conditions in more northeastern places, such as the Yukon Flats, and then along the Arctic coastline, primarily IFR, and then some areas of MVFR farther to the west. On Saturday afternoon, we are going to see continued IFR conditions for much of the North Slope area, some VFR conditions in the interior with some isolated MVFR expected, and some MVFR for southwest Alaska as well, and then a mixture of MVFR and IFR along the North Gulf Coast, getting better as we get to interior locations of south central Alaska, some VFR conditions there. Down in the Panhandle area, all going to be IFR for Saturday afternoon, and then out over the Bering Sea, we're going to have some areas out west that are MVFR, as well as areas to the east with some MVFR and isolated IFR conditions. Moving into the passes, starting up north at AKwx Pass on Friday, we are expecting to see MVFR conditions throughout the day. Adigan will start off VFR and then drop down to marginal conditions in the afternoon. Lake Clark and Merrill will both start off IFR and improve to MVFR conditions in the afternoon. Rainy Pass will start off MVFR, improving all the way to VFR in the afternoon. Windy Pass should be VFR throughout the day Friday. Isabel should also be VFR, and Mentasta will start off marginal and then improve to VFR conditions. Trinity Pass should be MVFR throughout the day Friday, and Portage will start off MVFR and then drop down to IFR conditions in the afternoon. Chilliwack and White will both start off MVFR and then drop down to IFR. For our freezing levels, we can see some areas of colder air coming into northern and western portions of the state, some warmer air out over the Panhandle area, and then some of those freezing levels at 2,000 feet out over the Panhandle or in Alaska Peninsula. For our icing, a lot of southern locations going to see icing between 1 and 5,000 feet by the western Aleutians, above 2,000 feet as you get closer towards the Alaska Peninsula, above 6,000 feet out over the northern portions of the Gulf, and above 5,000 feet for the Panhandle. For our jet stream, strongest portion of the jet going to be south of the central and western Aleutians, up to as high as 205 knots, quite strong there out of a west and northwest direction. Some weaker winds over the northern portion of the state out of a southerly direction, up to as high as 65 knots to the west of Seward Peninsula. Some weaker winds out of a southerly direction over the Panhandle. Down to 9,000 feet, winds over the Panhandle area out of a southerly direction, up to as high as 55 knots in northern locations. 30 knots out of the southeast direction over south central Alaska, 35 out over the Yukon Flats area out of an easterly direction. Some stronger winds around the Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula, up to as high as 60 knots near the eastern Aleutian Islands out of a northwesterly direction, dropping down into the 40s and eventually the 30s by the western Aleutians. Down to 3,000 feet out of a northerly direction for much of the Aleutians again at this level, 30 knots out west, but getting up to as high as 65 knots by the eastern Aleutian Islands, where we do have that warning out, and then we're going to see those continuing northerly winds throughout the Bering, dropping down into the 40s. Out over the Panhandle area, we are going to see some southerly winds, 40 knots through much of the Panhandle, getting a little bit stronger as we get closer towards the Yakutat area, up to as high as 50 knots there, and some winds around 40 knots around the Kenai Peninsula. Some areas of turbulence expected with these strong winds. We will see some severe turbulence by the eastern Aleutian Islands below 5,000 feet. Over southwest Alaska, below 5,000 feet there as well. And then below 6,000 feet for the Panhandle with some of the stronger winds through the channels.
Good evening, night walkers. Halloween is upon us, and there are stars and constellations in our sky that struck terror into the hearts of our ancestors, like Algol. You may remember Medusa from ancient Greek mythology, a winged woman with snakes for hair. To look into her eyes would turn you to stone. The Greek hero Percy sliced off her head, and it retained its powers. He carries it in the sky, and the demon eye is marked by the star Algol. Hit the darkness around 9 p.m. and look northeast. High in the sky, you should see the W of Cassiopeia. Draw a line through the second and third stars from the bottom of Cassiopeia to find Merfolk, the brightest star in Perseus. To its right is Algol. Algol was connected to this legend because it changes brightness and color. It's actually 3 stars orbiting each other. Keep an eye on it while you keep looking up.
If you've been watching this series, you know that NASA has scientists posted all over the world studying Earth's frozen regions. We've got people exploring ice sheets, glaciers, permafrost, sea ice, snow, and even ice on other planets. But even our top scientists need a little backup sometimes.
Do you like going outside to do science?
Yeah,
Why?
because it's fun.
Yeah. What's your favorite part?
Frost tube.
Frost tube! Cool!
In this bonus episode of Cryosphere, we're following the micro-explorers that are helping NASA collect data from their own backyard.
Do you think it's gonna be frozen?
Yeah.
Yes? Why?
Because it's very frozen!
Here's the idea. Students construct a frost tube that gets put into a hole in undisturbed and uncompacted soil. During the cold months, students will measure the depth at which water in the frost tube freezes, indicating that the surrounding soil has frozen. This is one of many citizen science projects facilitated by GLOBE, the Global Learning and Observations to Benefit the Environment program.
What's going on? What did you find out?
It's the ice!
How far down is the ice? So is there still liquid in there?
It's a worldwide program that, so far, has collected over 130 million measurements from more than 10 million students in 113 countries.
Are you scientists?
Yeah.
These measurements are added to a massive worldwide database that's free and open to the public.
GLOBE connects my students with the rest of the world through science and looking at climate change and how it's affecting the future.
Globe teachers like Terry are transforming the way kids see science and how they'll respond to changes in their future environment.
Let me see your happy face. Ah!
Actually, we were so impressed with the kids of John Fredson's school that we decided to show their work to the scientists in the original NASA Explorers Cryosphere series. And they had a couple things to say.
Oh my god, that's awesome.
Oh my god.
Do you like going outside to do science? Why? How far down is the ice?
That's awesome.
Wow, this is really, really cool.
Hey students from Miss Terry's class, I just got to see your video. I was so impressed that you guys were braving the conditions of the snow and all the crazy stuff to go and learn more about the permafrost and where the water layer is right outside your school. That looked incredible.
It is so exciting to see you guys and girls doing such great work as we watch our planet change over time.
Hey there, young scientists. Looks like you guys are doing some amazing things. Remember to keep warm and take notes, and also stay curious.
Oh my god, this is awesome. I love seeing the enthusiasm of these kids. They're outside, it's obviously really cold, but everyone is so excited to be out there making measurements for NASA. That's wicked cool.
Because you're so right, science is so fun, and I really hope that you'll continue believing in that. The best piece of advice I ever got was, whatever you do, do your best.
And from all of us here at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, remember, dare mighty things.
So keep up the great work. Make sure that you're having fun no matter what. That's the key thing about pursuing a career in science. Make sure it's something that you love. And I'm really impressed. So hopefully we'll take the lessons you're learning and apply them when we explore our solar system.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back for the marine section of the forecast. We'll start off with a look at our ice edge. Off the northwest coastline, so north of Wainwright, we are seeing some new ice growth. However, along the coastline, all along the Arctic coast, due to the recent weather, we have seen either a stall in ice growth or in some cases even some melting. Then down the west coast, we are seeing new ice as far south as Norton Bay and Gullivan Bay. And then as we look ahead into next week, we are going to see some cold air returning to the area where we do expect more ice growth all throughout the coastline. Taking a look now in southeast Alaska for Friday's forecast in the inside waters, southern locations, southeast winds 45 knots with seas up to as high as 20 feet. In the central inside waters, northerly winds 30 knots, gusting up to 40 knots, and then in Lynn Canal area, southeast winds 20 knots are expected. Out over the eastern Gulf, we are having southerly winds up to as high as 55 knots near Craig, seas up to as high as 28 feet. Becoming more easterly as we get into the northern Gulf, 30 to 40 knots there, seas up to as high as 21 feet. Then on Saturday, still going to have some stronger winds, but they will be a little bit weaker than Friday for the Gulf waters. And this is going to be in the eastern Gulf, south to southeast winds, 25 up to as high as 40 knots as we get north of Sitka, with seas up to 20 feet. And then as we get in the northern Gulf, easterly winds at 40 knots expected. In the inside waters and canal area, fairly calm, northerly winds 10 knots there. And then in the central and southern inside waters, southeast winds 20 to 25 knots, strongest as we get farther to the south. For south central Alaska, easterly flow or northeasterly flow throughout all of the area. 30 knots in the northern Gulf, 20 to 25 knots in the western Gulf. In the Cook Inlet area, 20 knots up north, getting up to as high as 30 knots out of that northeasterly direction, and 30 knots also for west of the Barren Islands. Prince William Sound, northeast winds, 20 knots expected. On Saturday in the Gulf waters, northern Gulf, easterly winds 35 to 40 knots, seas up to as high as 24 feet. Western Gulf, 30 to 35 knots out of the northeast, 19 feet for seas. Prince William Sound, going to see some stronger winds, northeast winds 30 knots there. And then the Cook Inlet area up north, northeast winds 15 knots, getting up to 25 knots out of the north as we get to the southern locations. And we're still going to see those northerly winds at 25 knots west of the Barren Islands. For the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island, I want to point out first the strong winds near the Alaska Peninsula area just to the south, up to as high as 65 knots out of a westerly direction, seas up to as high as 35 feet. On the Bering side of the peninsula, we are going to see winds up to a size 45 knots out of a northwesterly direction. Seas also high there, up to 33 feet. In Bristol Bay, easterly winds 35 knots, 13 feet for seas. Then out by Kodiak Island, east to southeast winds around 30 knots, seas up to size 19 feet, highest on the Gulf side. Then just to the east of Chignik, we are going to see southerly winds at 35 knots. On Saturday, wind's going to calm down a decent amount, but still fairly strong out by the Alaska Peninsula, and northwest winds 40 knots on both sides, seas up to size 19 feet, highest on the Bering side. Bristol Bay, northwest winds 25 knots, and then south of AKwx, 30 knots out of northwesterly direction, and around Kodiak Island, northerly winds 25 to 30 knots, strongest seas up to 18 feet on the Gulf side of the island. For the Aleutian Islands, we are going to see strongest winds out by the eastern Aleutians, westerly winds 65 knots expected, seas up to as high as 39 feet, highest on the Bering side, then 50 to 55 knots as we get near the Nikolsky area, and 40 knots out of the west as we get by the central Aleutians. Western Aleutians going to see the weakest winds, northwest flow 20 to 25 knots. On Saturday, still going to see that northwest wind out by the eastern Aleutians, 35 to 40 knots, dropping down to near 30 knots for the central Aleutians, and then 20 knots as we get by Kiska and by the Shimia area, south winds around to 15 knots. Along the west coast, primarily a northerly component to the winds, 25 up by the Norton Sound area, 30 down much of the coastline south of Nunavik Island, going to pick up to 35 knots, and strongest winds, northwest winds 45 knots by the Pribilof Islands, seas to 23 feet. On Saturday, still going to see somewhat of a north to northwest wind, 15 knots in the Norton Sound area, 30 knots elsewhere, seas up to size 14 feet, highest once again by the Pribilof Islands. Along the Arctic coastline, weak winds out east around 5 knots, picking up to 10 to 15 knots in the northwest coastline, and then down the west coast 20 to 25 knots north of the Bering Strait, 30 knots to the south. For Saturday, we're going to have westerly winds 20 knots by Kaktovik. Elsewhere, we're going to see northerly winds 15 to 20 knots along the rest of the Arctic coastline. Down the west coast, 25 to 30 knots expected. Quick recap, we do have several high wind warnings out, one for the eastern Aleutian Islands that will be out into Friday. Winds could be up to as high as or higher than 65 miles per hour, as well as down in the Panhandle area. We'll see some strong winds there.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.